Hello and welcome. We're here to discuss the third book in the series, The Seven Big Problems of Marketing. The series is edited by Bernie Jaworski, who joins us today to interview the authors of the new book titled Break the Wall, Why and How to Democratize Digital in Your Business. The authors, Zeynep Aksehirli, Yakov Bart, Kwong Chan, and Koen Pauwels, all from Northwestern University, will provide insights on what this book can do for you. So, Bernie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Marilyn, very much for the introduction. And I'm very excited to be the book series editor and have this as the third book in the series. There's probably no more important issue that's unfolding in business today than digital transformation. And we were very fortunate to get this author team together to actually write and craft this book. They've introduced a number of interesting concepts and an overarching framework in the book that I think is quite exciting and really moves the field forward in a very aggressive way. But let me ask a very simple question to get us started, which is, why is this book is important now in terms of the journey of digital transformation? And how has the landscape changed then over the last several years, where this book actually is incredibly timely at this point?
Thanks so much, Bernie. I'm happy to give a first pass at this one. So we have all seen digital transformation in the organizations that we work with, that we're the customer for. I think the major thing that has changed is that digital transformation used to be looked very narrowly, right? So you hired a bunch of data scientists and put them in some floor in your office building. You only optimize the consumer journey instead of thinking what it did with the rest of your organization. So now we have seen lots of kind of successes and failures, and we can learn from that one. We came up with this idea of democratization, that now it's time to look at it more holistically, to see, hey, how does it fit in with the rest of your organization, and how can you really reap the promised benefits? Because as study after study say, a lot of these transformation projects, they start very lofty, very ambitious goals, and they just fail to meet their objectives. And it's no longer an issue of, hey, this is the perfect technology that I need, or the perfect the perfect unicorn that you can hire and pay to just make the problem go away from you. It's really something that management and marketing and all the departments have to work together to reap the benefits.
So very, very helpful. I mean, I think the idea of moving away from just sort of data scientists and sort of a customer point of view to the holistic, both internal organization and external marketplace point of view is quite interesting. So what have you observed, and other authors feel free to contribute here in terms of thinking about this, what have you observed as the common goal-setting mistakes that organizations make as they think about this digital transformation journey?
So what we've seen is that often organizations, instead of setting any goals, no matter how lofty they are, they're just skipping that stage entirely. Of course, most times people just see very successful examples of digital transformation. And in their own companies, they believe that digital transformation in itself is a secret to success. And so very often we see businesses jump on this train out of fear of missing out before they even start thinking about how we're going to set the goals, what should be the process for setting the goals. And so out of this fear of missing out, essentially the company executives decide, okay, if we get through this digital transformation, if we just get on the other side of it, then we're going to be okay. Because look at other fantastic companies that managed to come out well out of this process. Of course, this is a bit of magical thinking, right? Or logical fallacy. You're not getting good results of digital transformation just because you're going to do it without understanding first why exactly you're going to do it. In other words, it's about setting goals. And so companies often get on this train when they say, okay, we're going to get digital, we're going to digitize this process, we're going to get a lot of data, and then we need to figure out how we can productively take advantage out of all this data we started ingesting. And so it becomes kind of chasing your own tail in a sense. Instead of having systematic goals that the company is trying to achieve with digital transformation, they start the process, they start getting the data, and they end up basically trying to do something that's convenient, giving the data they have based on the data that's more recent, but they don't pause to set strategic goals here.
So let me follow up on that one. And one of the interesting things you do in the book is you talk about the idea that these journeys oftentimes benefit from starting with a vision and having a vision about what maybe the end state looks like. And this relates to your notion of the goals where they're kind of bumbling along in the beginning. What's an example perhaps of a vision or a way of thinking about what that end state might look like that you've looked upon either as a case study or based upon your academic work? You said, this is actually kind of an interesting perspective of how this firm took a particular vision of what the end state would look like. Or alternatively, if you don't want to go with the case study, you can kind of give me a sense as to what that visioning process might look like. You can kind of go either way here.
I just wanted to quickly add something that we noticed with success stories in particular. When people are looking at digital transformation, if they focus just on the digital side and lose track of the transformation, it tends to be hollow and not reach to its goals. I think an organization is something that has been around for a while, and the transformation ideas in general has been well researched, well tested out. So instead of just focusing on the digital side, if you can shift the focus to the idea of changing the organization, transforming each person's responsibilities and perspectives, it goes much easier and much better for the organization, even though the subject matter is trying to make them use the digital technology much better in their daily life.
That's really interesting. It's almost like you should relabel it to be transformation of digital as opposed to digital transformation, because transformation is kind of the critical word here. Have you, in terms of the journey itself, looking at companies that I'm familiar with trying to make these transformational changes, perhaps outside of digital is my experience, but when I see these journeys to be, for example, a journey that's shift being product centered to one that's customer centered, it's oftentimes a 4, 5, 6, 7-year journey. And sometimes the expectations are, well, we'll be digital next year, we'll be digital the year after. But the idea that this is actually a lengthy transformation period, I'm not sure if that's something that you've observed. And and Kwong or Koen, you can kind of step in here. But is this something where we have to set expectations? This journey is not going to be overnight. It's going to take multiple years to kind of get there from an organization-wide perspective, or how should we be thinking about the length of this journey?
I think this ties in really well to your question you just asked, the vision part of it, because some senior leadership has a vision they would like to be implemented this quarter, some within this financial year, and some going longer. Sometimes the vision outlasts the leadership, depending upon the nature of the environment. We saw a lot of that in COVID-19. So when it comes to the change aspects that Zeynep was talking about, what works in terms of setting a vision, getting the change to occur, and of what period of time. We have some examples, I think, from some companies, more than several examples of the same phenomenon. One example being curbside pickup, right? So everybody wants to do curbside pickup. COVID-19 was one of the examples where more companies wanted to pursue curbside pickup. But sometimes the question of how this enhances the customer experience, the consumer experience, wasn't asked. It was, well, either competitors are doing it, so we should do it, or it's another option for the customer, so therefore it must be good. And as we know, sometimes more options don't lead to better utility or better experiences. And just that simple example ties back into, well, how many different people have to be communicated with and trained to enable good curbside pickup, whether it's the person bringing the product to the vehicle, whether it's the ordering system. Some famous companies that we all use, they have 2 separate systems now. One is curbside pickup and one is not, and it's quite visible to see the effects that don't always optimize the customer experience. So that journey for many companies was supposed to be 3 months, right, and 6 months. 2.5 years later, we can still see that sometimes it takes longer to get your product through curbside pickup than it is to park your car, go in and pay, check out, and go back to your vehicle.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, it's important to have this vision, and it's also just important to realize that in my work, I always say I plan for a certain amount of time, and then I predict it will take double that time. And I think for any transformation project, that's a good rule of thumb. So an example of a vision is really kind of the shared ownership, right? Sitting around a computer or a TV screen, and everybody kind of having all the information at their fingertips, and really having that feeling of I know what I contribute, I know what I get out of this. And that really reminds me about my earlier work about dashboards, and how the vision for this one was be something that everybody understood how their work contributed to the bigger picture, and going back. Sometimes it's really specific. So one of the interviews that I really loved in the book is with an analyst from the Red Sox, right? And if you look at Fenway Park, right, we're all in Boston, the authors here. There's so much optimization in baseball of course, the players you have, right? As was very popularized in Moneyball. But then, every kind of seat would cost the same price, and there was no price optimization of the merchandise and the beer there. And so the question was kind of, we have optimized, just kind of a very specific part of what we do. Can we also get data-driven decisions on everything else? And we kind of get more revenues out of that one to really further the ultimate goal of the organization. So that kind of, a specific vision, this is what our company needs. Instead of just kind of trying to copy it from other organizations. It makes it very concrete for leadership and for every employee. This is why we're doing that, and this is what we can achieve.
So this probably relates to why the subtitle of the book here, I feel like I'm being a person who's actually marketing the book for you here. The subtitle is Why and How to Democratize Digital in Your Business. And so I think maybe this theme is one of the kind of the early indicators, the Red Sox situation. So you can focus so much on the game, on constructing the team, and maybe not bringing it holistically throughout the entire organization. So I'm wondering, I like the term democratization, but what do you think about that? Why is that so important to use that perspective of democratizing digital?
Looking from the organization's perspective, it's actually two very selfish reasons to want to do that. One of them has to do with making better decisions. So at this point, most of the organizations we deal with are aware of data being collected at various sides of the organization. They're trying to store it, use it to the best of their abilities, but the differentiator for more successful organizations is that they can use that data to make better decisions. And when you look at that statement, decisions are not things that we do quarterly at a big scale, choosing A, B, or C option. It's every employee, every day, make small decisions to make the organization better or fulfill its mission, or whatever they're doing at the individual scale involves decision making. So them being able to access any part of the data being collected at other sides of the organization, and knowing how to handle that data, learning about it, and improving their own skills is going to cause them, help them make better decisions. So that's the one big reason to encourage that. On the second side, it's more about building trust. So it's not that everybody in the organization needs to know all the data. So if I'm at customer service, I don't necessarily need to know daily sales data or daily return data or something like that. But when I'm interacting with data sources of the company, I'm being roadblocked left and right, I can't access certain things, that indicates to me that the organization doesn't trust me. So if you want people to trust you first and become better citizens of your organization, have more commitment to what you're doing, then you have to take the first step in building that trust and letting them free in a way in your data sources, and refrain from being all that siloed perspective that you're trying to give access to only particular people doing making use of data.
That's a really interesting.
I'm a little going revolutionary here.
No, I love that idea. And what I hear you say is there's got to be transparency, there's got to be access, there has to be trust. You have to, if you're going to democratize the data, it's got to be available and people have to use it. Interesting enough, not for the big decisions. Yes, they have to do that, but everyday decisions in terms of workflow and so forth. Koen, I can see that you're anxious to add additional comments.
I was just, that answer really reminded me of the brilliant PhD dissertation by Professor Aksehirli, which was really about, if you're in an organization and you promote cooperation norms, right? So to the outside and also inside, you say we should all work together towards, we're customer obsessed, we really want to have the best solution for our customer. But then internally, you're not kind of, making the information flow. The information is really guarded and really siloed. And then that clash is definitely going to be noticed by your employees and ultimately also be translated in worse customer service or worst outcome in the marketplace.
We're digressing here a little bit, but apparently people are better at recognizing the actions the organization takes as opposed to what they say. So no matter how much you propose that you're being equitable and you're open and transparent and everything, if your systems don't encourage and give way to that, it's going to create a hypocritical feeling in your employees.
This can be as simple as the goals, right? So when Yakov talked about some companies set the goals and some companies don't, this of course is not an omission that's specific to an industry. Universities do it, sports franchises do it. We've all seen examples. And imagine a goal the edict coming from above, and they might say, well, you need to cooperate more with other functions in your organization. And then 3 functions say, we do that already. Why are we getting an edict from above? And so just beginning like that without doing an assessment that who's already fulfilling the goal, let's see who is not, then let's coalesce around that and get everybody from the ground up or middle out, if you like, to try to pursue this new goal. If you don't do that, it just looks like, well, this insensitive leadership has said, here's a goal, but we're already doing it. Now we're being kind of ignored by de facto communication methods. And if we can overcome that style of just mandating it without measuring what's going on first, well, it's not a good foot to start off on.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. So let me ask Yakov. This is a more difficult question. So, and I apologize for asking it, but here it goes. When you talk about democratization of data, you talk about a firm democratizing the data, and then interacting with customers and so forth to get kind of an integrated experience and so forth. There's an interesting evolution of what's unfolding with respect to competition, where it may not be single firm against a single firm, but it may be an ecosystem of partners, alliances, and everything else that people put together that in turn compete against another ecosystem of alliances and partners and everything else. And so the question is, when we democratize the data, how do we extend it to our ecosystem of partners, of channel partners, of other people that we work with, these software vendors that maybe help build our technology platform? All that stuff. How democratized are we here in terms of because you got to play off privacy and competitive advantage and not releasing information in the marketplace, but at the same time you want your partners to be fully informed and to be able to access the data. So there's a bit of a tricky problem perhaps here, but I've saved it for you, Yakov, since I know that you want to have difficult questions, not easy questions. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
Thank you, Bernie. Appreciate it. Now, that's a really interesting question. Unfortunately, there's no simple answer here because it really depends on the type of data, which units the democratization is going to be spread around, and also, of course, what exactly is the goal for the company? Is the company trying to turn one of the products into a platform? And if that's the case, then that necessitates setting up protocols for sharing data with the partners who would be onboarded on that platform on different sides as suppliers, as consumers, and of course then figuring out mechanism to enforce protocols for sharing this data so that different parts of the platform can use it but at the same time, they couldn't just take the data away and start, their own business enterprise with the data that, you democratized within, right? So that usually creates a challenge, and sometimes sort of how fast, how slow companies move here depends, again, first of all, whether turning the existing kind of linear value creation chain into a platform like value creation or ecosystem, is it one of the strategic goals of transformation or not? And also it depends on the culture within the company, because very often, sort of as Zeynep was saying, it's really important to see, you can't just take the culture and assume that whoever you're trying to bring in into your ecosystem, into platform, is going to have similar culture right away. So sometimes you start with culture and then you proceed with sharing more data more broadly, establishing protocols, etc.
It's really interesting. I think the culture thing is a kind of an interesting one. I've observed in ResMed that when they decided to go all digital and transform their entire business, which I could talk about in a second, this issue of trying to figure out the culture was interesting, because what happened is they were traditionally a box supplier with sleep apnea equipment. And then when software came into play, they had to actually, the culture of a software company changed the culture of ResMed, because ResMed used to be a company that every 6 months they'd have a product launch and well, in the software world, you're getting launched, everything's changing. You get new updates to the software, new stuff. So the speed of the software side of ResMed changed the speed of the hardware side. So the entire organization's culture became much more software related as opposed to kind of hardware manufacturing kind of related. And what was interesting about their ecosystem is when they made the change, they made the data available to their patients, so the patient could see their sleep scores at night. They made the data available to doctors so they could see the patient data around sleep. They made it available to the insurers to show compliance with the equipment. And obviously they used it internally to help redesign products and so forth. So there's a win-win across the entire ecosystem. So I think culture is a really interesting one that can either phenomenally get in the way, or it can accelerate, or as we just saw with ResMed, it can kind of change over time to be much more of a different speed. In this case, speed was a big issue, to kind of be a quicker, more agile type of company kind of coming out of that, right? So that's kind of an interesting story. Let me shift gears a little bit. The book, obviously, not only does it have a set of chapters that kind of talk you through the process of transformation, but it also has a lot of kind of interview data with managers to surface a lot of the issues that drove the construction of the overall book. Upon reflection, now the book's done, you sat back, you thought about this, are there 2 or 3 recommendations you would give to practitioners? Now, that can either be related to setting up the digital transformation goals, or it could just be stepping back from that, just saying, hey guys, here's 3 big takeaways for practitioners as we sort of learned in crafting the book and doing the interviews and everything else, as to what knowledge base you collectively have now, that there's 3 solid recommendations we can have for practice. And I'm just curious, what those might be.
Well, what we like about, I think, the book is it's quite condensed. There's a lot of information in a very short volume, but it's very rich as well. I think it's an easy read. And so amongst us, when we talk about the takeaways, we have different opinions, even amongst us authors. What are the top takeaways, right? My view is not exactly the same as, say, Koen or Zeynep or Yakov's view, but there is one consistent theme that is not only a driver for the book, and even this book series that we're part of, it's that grounded storytelling, like talking to people from all levels of the organization. And it can be random. You can be walking the halls and you can talk, or walking the Zoom halls even, and get views from the person who's collecting the data, who's crunching the data, who's cleaning the data, get views from the senior executives or even the C-level suite. When you get enough of that exposure, the kinds of decisions, the kinds of exposures to cultures and the goals and objectives you have, it's so different from just being in your own world. So one takeaway, and I'll just do one for now and let my co-authors talk about other takeaways, is this perspective allows you to, number one, most importantly perhaps, look at the difference between the technological reasons for barrier to adoption, right, or wall to adoption, like data or computers or access or passwords, versus the human reasons. Is it the older, more senior, seasoned employees versus the newer employees? Is it these acquisitions of software versus hardware? Sometimes we confuse one for the other, and just talking to people can help us delineate the real reasons for change and lack of change.
You're on mute, Bernie. Bernie, you're on mute.
By the way, that took us about a half hour, which is very unusual. Usually that happens at about the 3-minute mark. So getting to 30 minutes before somebody muted themselves is an all-time world record, I think, is the... So I love the idea that it's a human enterprise. It's about organizations, about change. And I'm going to talk about the interdisciplinary issue in a bit, but coming back to that issue around, it's not about the technology, it's about change, about transformation, about the people outside and so forth. I think it's quite interesting. So that's one takeaway. I'm going to let the other three folks give their principle, and given that you've already, Kwong, kind of taken the top one, they're forced now to, the bar is higher as we work ourselves through this process here. So let me go with Zeynep.
No, I'm going next.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Now I'm like Kwong is saying, we all have different things that we hold on to. I think for me, one of the takeaways is the seeing the model that Koen is having at the back of his thing, and sort of emphasizing different parts of the organization that act at different speeds. So smaller chunks of people, so either it's the product teams or the departments, particular departments, they act and notice things in a much faster speed than people who are making the strategic decisions for the overall organization. So I think one of the takeaways from our conversations with all the people we talked to was recognizing that difference in their speed and telling both sides, if you will, to notice that difference. So if you're in the smaller side, you can see the problem much more quickly. You can come up with reasons or solutions in your mind much more quickly. Push for that feed forward cycle and try and change whatever is going above you. And then for the people who are looking down, for the lack of a better word, realize that they're going to have the luxury of seeing things much more clearly than you do, and try and incorporate that feed forward and disseminate it to all the other parts of the place you have power over.
It's a really interesting observation. There's some people that make the argument that, when you have people that are at frontline levels that are experiencing the data, using data, making changes in their workflow, their behaviors, everything else, that there's a clay layer that's at the middle of the organization where it doesn't permeate back to the top as to what's happening. So part of the challenge here is not just the fact that the bottom is making the change happen, but it's how do we get to the senior folks that they understand how this is being transformed. And at the same time, you raise the issue, there's top down, there is the visioning element, the strategy element, right? So it's the coming together of those two parts that kind of creates kind of the challenge for the organization. So Koen is getting very itchy here. Yakov, I'm gonna let you go last. You're the Red Sox cleanup hitter here. Red Sox did not do very well, I think, in the overall transformation of this past year. So we're a little disappointed with the Sox, but that's another story here. So I'm gonna let Koen kind of go, and then Yakov, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I was smiling with your clay layer kind of metaphor, Bernie, because it always reminds me, so in organizations, right, I always compare middle management to like an old school shaman. So you have the spirits, from top management, you have to somehow translate to the people, and vice versa. And so that is really challenging. And in any transformation effort, I think my broader thing, which kind of touches upon both Kwong's and Zeynep's point, is the roles that we play. So throughout all of these interviews, right, I started kind of assigning roles, kind of, hey, this is the analyst, obviously, right? This person loves number crunching and kind of, the challenge is to make the numbers kind of important and to communicate them in a way that decision makers kind of, actually use them, which is always a big challenge. Then we have the advocates, right, which are basically, maybe the stereotypical marketing person in a company that is kind of championing the stuff and using mostly more qualitative arguments. You have the communicator, or the people who loves visualization, and then you have the decision maker. And so I think it's just very important to think about all of these roles. They're all necessary to make this transformation work, really. And so I mean, one of the reasons I put on my background, right? So in our data forum, we really kind of structured our annual forum in discussions among these folks. And we said, okay, who are the analyst mavens? Who are the critical communicators? What are some of their challenges? And then how does it all work together? And so likewise, I rescheduled all my teaching with that, right? So I say to my students, well, look, you know, this is what you're trying to achieve. You know, there is some quantitative data that's very important. There's qualitative things. There's the context of the organization. There's the culture. There's your vision, your goals, and somebody has to make sure it all fits together. And so I having my students role play these different kind of critical roles, as I call them, and come up with, you know, just more interesting and more informed discussions that really drive the progress forward.
And I really like that. I also really like the fact, the idea of visioning up front, because, you know, the idea would be, at least in theory, people align themselves to the vision, you know, so everybody has a responsibility as a knowledge worker to understand the vision, understand their unit's role in that, understand what their individual role is to contribute, you know, in the classic, given my strengths, given my competencies, given how I like to work, what can I do to help achieve the overall vision mission is kind of the starting point around the alignment issue of getting all these really diverse roles to kind of fit together. So batting cleanup now is Yakov, who's going to give his as you take away the top 1, 2, or 3. Now he's at number 4, so he's got it. You know, he's got it. The bar is raised in terms of insight. So I'm curious here, Yakov, what your thoughts are at this point.
Well, I think I definitely agree with, you know, thoughts of my esteemed colleagues here that it's important to, you know, keep in mind, it's really important to understand that different parts of organizations move at different speed while connected with each other. And of course, you know, it's important to understand who's playing which role. But the final thing I would add, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the speed of digital transformation is determined by the slowest wheel, the slowest, you know, team member. And that's why, you know, you can see in many organizations, there is this urge from the top, there's a push from the top. Okay, maybe you're not the fastest wheel, but you got to move faster. We got to do this transformation really as speedy as possible. It's urgent. You know, the good old, you know, move fast and break things, you know, pioneered by Zuckerberg, you know, no longer applies to digital transformation, because we've seen too many organizations who try to move fast, regardless of which roles they play, regardless of which speeds they were basically taken on top of the bottom of the organization. But sometimes moving fast just for the sake of it, regarding any transformation as the faster and the more you do, the better. I think it's sort of one of the biggest lessons from the last few years. Yes, it's important to start looking at how your company must go through digital transformation as soon as possible, but this action bias that we often see getting perpetuated from the top when it comes to digital transformation, it's better doing something than not doing anything. Sometimes it really can backfire without setting proper goals for all members of the organization and setting proper speeds, of course.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. In the book, you articulate this idea there's different speeds at which the organization progresses, and you need to kind of take that into account as opposed to trying to solve it, you know, and it's kind of, it's something that happens in terms of how the progress sort of works sort of a bit unevenly. So let me ask, our last question is really, you've got behind you the data initiative. A lot of you have your data initiative background up, which I think is really quite interesting. And, you know, you're a interdisciplinary team, right? You're writing the book not from just a marketing perspective, but from an OB perspective, a broad, you know, broad organization-wide perspective. So it raises the issue. We always are challenged to say, you know, the problems that organizations experience are often interdisciplinary, but business schools really can't deal with that because that's not the way we're organized. So we're not going to do it, you know. And but you guys have taken upon yourself to write an interdisciplinary book, and if I understand it correctly, a lot of the work that you're doing at Northwestern within your center is focused on this notion of interdisciplinary. So I'd love for you to comment on, you know, perhaps it's obvious to the audience that digital transformation needs an interdisciplinary perspective. I'm not quite sure, but you were able to build a team that was able to address this from looking at it from different lenses. And I'm just curious, you know, how you were able to accomplish that and what you're trying to do more generally with your data initiative that you have at Northwestern.
I think a lot of Yeah, go ahead, Koen. Yeah.
Just I'd like to start with kind of one thing, right? So we're at Northeastern University. So our only claim is that we're the very best university in the US Northeast.
My apologies. My apologies. I don't know. I didn't have enough coffee this morning. I was like, my apologies. That was a faux pas. Yeah.
No, and so yes, so I think kind of multidisciplinary is really in the DNA of this university, and they put their money where their mouth is, right? So there's internal grants, there's different kind of carrots and sticks to motivate faculty to work across these disciplines, because they have their own big problems that don't always coincide with what marketers see as the big problems, right? The AMA, but they have their own big society problems that they want every college to contribute to and to work with. And so in that sense, kind of having initiatives that bring together faculty, students from very different colleges is just really much in line with the mission. Sorry, Koen, go ahead.
No, it's a natural way to think about it. On the face of it, some problems seem to be easily solvable by one group of people with similar backgrounds. But when you look deeper, it's better solved by people who have often no overlapping backgrounds. So an example could be our trains running late. Right. So how do we solve that? And classically, it could be a logistics, management science, scheduling problem. But these kind of problems these days, the more you look at it, the train's running late. Is it a weather thing? Is it customers holding the doors back? Is it the escalator was broken down? Is it that the signaling technology doesn't account for a half-second delay with the door, so therefore it propagates throughout the system? And so if you throw just a team of MBAs at that problem, you'll get a certain answer, right? You throw a team of engineers at the problem, you get a different answer. Throw a bunch of data scientists at their problem, you get, another kind of answer. And we started to find, almost by accident, that when we had different groups of people solving the problem, whether it's professionals, whether it's students, whether it's faculty, not only did the problem become more complete in terms of its question and its answer, the companies were far more satisfied. And these days, we have a lot of firms and organizations coming to us and saying, we want a team to help solve this. And we'd like to come to you at Northeastern University and express the data initiative, because you're data biased, but your teams are almost always interdisciplinary. We have teams with political science people and mathematics people, engineering people, health sciences, business, etc. And we've always find that take the big picture. They're not trying to be a scheduler. They're not trying to be a customer service optimizer. They're trying to solve the bigger picture, and it kind of falls out from that very broad background mix that we put together.
Thank you, guys. I think that's really helpful, and I think it's a noble mission at Northeastern University to kind of pursue that type of work. And it's just not easy to do. It's not easy to do. Organizations are much better at, even though there's a bunch of silos typically in big organizations, but they're a little bit better about thinking about kind of the need to actually address the organization-wide sets of issues. I think business schools and research centers oftentimes get in the way of themselves in terms of looking at problems the way you guys have. So I commend you. So let me ask one, I'll just go around the circle here with, if you wanted to communicate one message related to the book, one key message, and it could be related to academic theory, could be related to business practice, it could be related to the issue we just talked about, interdisciplinary, whatever you want to do. But if you kind of one big takeaway that you want to communicate related to the book, and we'll let each of you kind of jump in. And I feel like I need to have Yakov go first because he's always been the cleanup hitter here. So we'll let Yakov start us off here.
Sure. I think one thing, again, it's so many voices out there that tell company executives, go ahead with your digital transformation. You got to finish it as soon as possible. What I really advise folks to think about before breaking any barriers on the way to democratizing the data in the path of digital transformation is to think first, is the barrier actually there for a reason? Because often the sort of mindless, okay, let's try to collect as much data as possible without concern for consumer privacy. Let's try to share as much data as possible without setting protocols. Often these barriers that were there before the digital transformation started, these barriers were there for a reason. And so I would advise to think carefully before breaking any barriers to understand first why these barriers were there in the first place.
Excellent, thank you. Zeynep, what are your thoughts here?
So am I understanding the question correctly? You want us to suggest a reason to read the book?
Yeah, at some level, I guess that is the motivation, right? Because I'm asking what's the one big takeaway that you have at this
Yeah,
point.
if
So,
I'm
yeah,
looking
yeah.
from if I'm looking from that perspective, one thing that I like about this work is it extended beyond what we know with our 4 different accents around the table here, with experiences all around. We tried to put as much raw information as possible. After we tried on, we talked to all these people to summarize it in our own way with takeaways, but then we want to give as much of the raw data as well to people to draw their own conclusions and learn things that would be more applicable to their own situations. So I think one of the reasons to focus on this book as opposed to other ones would be you're getting lots of voices that you can use to help form better opinions yourself.
I think it's a really interesting observation. So for everybody's benefit, the book actually has a lot of narratives of stories of transformation where they did the qualitative interviews and shared the entire body of work for people to reflect on in terms of what they could learn. And I love the idea that you read the interviews, you can pull stuff away as much as we can, right? So seeing the raw data, I think, is a really interesting. And Kwong's observation earlier around there's a story, there's a narrative that people are telling is actually an interesting way to kind of learn and kind of communicate what's unfolding there. So since I've used Kwong's name already, Kwong, what's your one reason to read the book?
Well, I think you took my thunder and made it better. We all love data here. In companies, in this world, we're talking about data-driven decision-making is almost a mantra, data scientists and algorithms and AI. But you know what travels better than data? Stories travel better than data, right? And our book is full of those stories, both in the written chapters and in the raw interviews we have published. If you're trying to get something done that's complex, a story, collect the stories in your company, try to anonymize them if you have to, share them, right? There's no need to put those barriers up. And maybe people start to understand why they need to invest in a new database software that does the exact same thing as a previous database software, right? There's a story there. And that will often resonate far better than just, this is better, faster, cheaper. What's the story? Is it the consumer story? Is it the story of the department? That's the big takeaway for me.
That's great. Thank you. Koen, your last word here.
So I have 2 things. Number one, why is this book better than anything else currently on the market? Very simple. You can summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences. I'm a very impatient person. I will get to that in my last point. So I hate reading a book that goes for 300 pages if you can summarize it in like half a paragraph, as most business books unfortunately are these days. Not this book. So this book, it is well organized. It has more than 1 message and more than 1 lesson you can draw from. So I think that's my spiel about the thing. On the other side, it's really actionable. So it's called Break the Wall, act now, buy the book now, read it, give it to the employees in your company, share it. And so it is, you don't need to wait for the perfect software or the perfect vendor. You should start now. So even though I agree with Yakov that you have to be thoughtful, right? You have to be thoughtful about things that matter. Why are there barriers in your organization? Why have past projects not have the desired results in your company and other ones? What can you do about it? How can you think through about it before you take action? But then you do have to take action. And this fantasy that the technology will improve and that magically the perfect vendor will fall out of the sky to do it for you, that is just not true. You have to act and you have to break the wall.
It's great. Thank you. And I just want to, before I hand off to Marilyn, just want to thank you all for taking the time to walk through a lot of the core ideas in the volume. And I can see Marilyn's already has the book cover up here. It's available both through Emerald as well as through Amazon. And I would really highly encourage folks to kind of take a close look at the book and to take away some of the core lessons learned. Marilyn, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for all of your insights. And we really appreciate you taking the time to talk us through this fascinating conversation. Great book, highly recommend. And as Bernie mentioned, it's published with Emerald in partnership with the American Marketing Association, and you can buy it at Amazon or at the Emerald Bookstore. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk soon.
Thanks so much, Marilyn, Bernie.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you guys.